Okay, so a couple of weeks ago, the Torah spoke about the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu, and we have a verse in the Torah that says, "Lo yichein avdi Moshe b'chol beisi ne'eman." Moshe, my servant, Hashem testifies, is completely trustworthy. He is trustworthy in my entire home, God says, so to speak. My home is open to him. I trust him completely, right? No one else do we find such an expression that Hashem says, I trust him so completely. And then along comes this week's Torah portion, and we have a very strange story. Hashem tells Moshe to do one thing, and Moshe turns around and he does something different. And of course, all the commentaries discuss it and speak about it. Well, how does Moshe come to deviate from the words of Hashem? Right? Everything that Moshe does, we even discussed on Shabbos, Aaron says to the angel of death, everything that comes from Moshe's mouth comes directly from Hashem. So how could Moshe deviate from what Hashem told him? Hashem tells him to speak to the rock, and he goes ahead and hits the rock. So, amongst the many other explanations, one of the explanations that's given is actually Hashem gave Moshe different instructions at different times. Right? If you take a look when the Jews first came out of Egypt, so they're also complaining they don't have any water, they're in the desert, and they come and they say to Moshe, we're about to die in this desert, you should have left us in Egypt. And at that point, Hashem told Moshe, go to the rock and hit the rock. Right? And now, many years later, after the Jews got stuck in the desert and wandered for 40 years and worshipped the golden calf and did all these other things, sent the spies, so Hashem now changes the instruction, and he told Moshe, you should speak to the rock. So this kind of, I guess to a certain extent, lessens it's not that Moshe was deviating from the words of Hashem, it's that he was following an outdated instruction, an expired instruction, right? Something he was told many years ago. And the Rish Shmuel says Moshe actually had a logical argument that he made with Hashem. He said, Moshe recognized that, we know that this relationship with the rock, speaking to the rock and hitting the rock, represents his relationship with the Jewish people. And Moshe, who was a big Torah scholar, took one of the first principle, the first of the 13 principles with which one studies Torah. What's the first principle with which one studies Torah? We say it every morning. There are 13 principles with which we can expound and understand the Torah. The first one is called a kal v'chomer, right? A kal v'chomer. That's a logical argument that if the law is like this in this case, so certainly in a what?
Expiatory or something like that.
I'm not sure how to translate kal v'chomer. It means the light, I guess the light and the heavy, or less severe and more severe. So if you're going to be strict in a less strict case, you'll certainly be strict in a more strict case, in a more severe case, right? So Moshe made an argument. He said, Hashem, when the Jews first came out of Egypt, they were all tzaddikim. They were a new nation, freshly out of exile, and they were all tzaddikim. And yet, when they started complaining, what did you tell me to do? To go give the rock a good patch, right? So now, after the Jews went ahead, they worshipped the golden calf. They sent the spies. They complained. They rose up with Kairach rebellion. They spent the last 40 years kvetching and complaining about everything in the book. So certainly now they deserve a few more petch, right? But now I'm going to start talking to them, right? Only makes sense. I should hit the rock. And this is Moshe's argument. And we need to understand what was wrong with this argument. What was the problem with Moshe's argument? So, a Rosh Yeshiva once came to the Beis Yisrael, the Gerer Rebbe, and he told him that there was a certain bacher in the yeshiva that they wanted to, that's causing a lot of problems in the yeshiva. And they wanted to expel him from the yeshiva. They wanted to kick him out. And, he doesn't want to do it on his own. He wants to get the approval of his Rebbe. So, and he starts describing the different troubles that this bacher is causing. He's a bad influence on all those around him. So the Rebbe stops this Rosh Yeshiva and he says, "Let me ask you, what's the situation? Are his parents both healthy?" And the Rosh Yeshiva says, "I don't know." What's their parnasa situation in the house? What's their financial situation? Is everything okay? I don't know. How's the shalom bayis in his house? I don't know.
Right, 3 rounds.
I don't know. When he comes to yeshiva, is he hungry or is he well fed? I don't know.
Yeah.
Did you at least bother checking his shoes? Can you tell me if his shoes have holes in it? He says, I don't know. I don't check their shoes. That's not the... I check his learning. I check his behavior. I don't check his shoes. Says the Beis Yisrael, somebody needs to be thrown out of yeshiva, but it's not this bacher. Okay? It's not this bacher. Right?
Indeed.
When someone is acting up, when someone is so if it's a small thing, a one-time thing, you could tell him off, you could rebuke him. But if somebody keeps on acting up, there's a problem here. And you need to figure out what's the underlying problem, what's causing it. And this is true even when we ourselves feel like we're being harmed or attacked by somebody else. What? Oh, water. In the city of Buchach, there lived Rabbi Avram David Vorman. He's the author of the Eshel Avram, a commentary in the Shulchan Aruch. There are a few different commentaries called Eshel Avram. It's in the back of the Shulchan Aruch. You'll find him. He was a student of Reb Meir Premishlan. And he used to spend his entire day learning. He barely slept. He would get up at Chatzois. He would say taking Chatzois. He would spend the rest of the night studying. In the morning he would daven. After davening, he would spend another few hours in shul learning. He was like alone in shul. He would just sit there and learn. And then afterwards, he would lock up the shul. He had those days didn't have built-in locks. They had a padlock. So he would take a lock the door, and then he would go home to eat. And then after he ate, he would go to the Beis Din to deal with whatever cases. He was the rabbi of the town. He would go to the Beis Din. Now, at one point, there was a very big machloikes, a very controversial argument in the community. And, different people were very involved in this argument. And as rabbi of the community, he realized he has to do something about it. So he, usually he was a very quiet and reserved person, but he knew he had to take a stand, and he took a stand, and he put down the argument. A couple of days later, the rabbis are sitting in the Beis Din, and they're waiting for Bavram to join them in the afternoon, and he doesn't come. So they figure maybe he's not feeling well. They want to send somebody. They'll send somebody to his house to find out how he's doing. So they go to his house, and they find his wife running around. My husband didn't come home today. And they start thinking, where could he have gone? What could have happened to him? So they tell the gabbai to go, check in shul, make sure, maybe he's still in shul. The gabbai runs to shul. He comes back. He's like, nope, it's gone. Shul's locked. Everything is closed over there. The Beis Medrash was in the shul. So what could have happened? They knew that recently there were some anti-Semitic incidents in the town. They quickly organize. What? The Beis Medrash was in the shul. It was part of the shul building. He would daven in shul, and he would continue learning in the shul, and then he would leave the shul and lock up. He would lock up the shul building, which had the Beis Medrash in it, right?
So you would lock up the shul?
No, the whole building would be locked up.
Then how would he get into the building to get into his medrash?
No, he would lock up after he would leave. That was the whole point. He would lock up after he left.
After he left the Beis Medrash?
Yes, after he left the Beis Medrash. So they organized search parties throughout the entire town looking for him, and they didn't find anything. it's already late afternoon, and they decide that it's almost mincha time. Everybody should they make an announcement. Everybody should come to shul an hour early for mincha, and they're going to say Tehillim for their rabbi. They don't know what happened to him. And they come to shul, and the gabbai opens up the lock, and the rabbi's sitting inside and learning. And they're like, "Is everything okay?" And he's like, "Yes, everything's fine. Go tell my wife that I'm doing well and everything's okay." What happened? Did you lose track of time? The whole day? And he says, "No. What happened was I finished learning and I got up and I wanted to lock the door and I found that the lock was not where it's supposed to be, and somebody locked me in. Somebody locked me in the shul." Who could have done such a thing? They launched an investigation, and somebody overheard from one of the people that was involved in the argument that he was going to fix that rabbi who put down their argument, and they found out, they figured out who it was, and leaders of the community have a big meeting. Look, this is a terrible thing. We can't let such a thing. We can't let such a thing slide. So they decided that they have to put this man in chayrim. They have to excommunicate him. And the rabbi wasn't really interested, but the community leaders decided this has to be done. They called together everybody gathered together in shul. They lit candles. Everybody wore black. I don't know, whatever the process for a chayrim was. They opened up the Aron HaKodesh, and they're waiting for the rabbi to get up and say the prayers. And Rabbi Avram gets up, and he says like this. He says, a chayrim is a very severe thing. And, putting somebody else in chayrim, I'm a little bit nervous, because maybe I also deserve to be put in chayrim. I'm not perfect, right? However, something terrible happened over here, and everybody's gathered together to do something about it. So I want to take this opportunity to ask everybody to daven for this person. He's obviously experiencing difficult times. He has stress in his life, a lot of problems, and I want everybody to join me in davening to Hashem to remove all the sadness, bitterness, and hatred from this person's heart. And when the person actually was told later what happened, he immediately came to Rabbi Avram and apologized. When apologized for what he had done. And this is a very difficult thing. When somebody attacks us, to say, what is this person experiencing? What difficulties is that person going through? Right? But that's what we have to do. That's what we have to do when we see somebody sinning, when we see somebody doing something wrong, especially if it's something outrageous, something unusual, something terrible. We have to think to ourselves, why are they doing this? Something's causing them to do this. The Chayza of Lublin once said over this following story, which he said came from the Baal Shem Tov. It was this Jew. His name was Yankel. And Yankel had a problem. He had a big problem. Right? He had a family, a few children, but he had no money. Right? Pretty common problem. He has to support his family. He has to feed his family. And he tries getting a job. He tries one job, another job. Nothing works. He's not very skilled. He's not very talented. And every job he tries, he fails. One day, after a long, hard day of failed work, he's walking home hungry. And he passes by, it's already dark outside, he passes by the bakery, and the bakery is already closed, and he smells the smell of bread in the bakery, very hungry. He looks at the door, he notices that the door wasn't closed properly, and he opens it up, he goes inside, and he takes some food for his family. Okay, his family has something to eat, but then another few days go by, and again he's hungry, and this time he decides he's going to go into the bakery. This time it's locked completely, but he figures out how to open it, right? He climbs over the thing into a window, and he gets through. And slowly over time, he became more skilled at his craft, and he became the town ganef, right? And
He got good at that.
a lot of people kind of knew it. He was very skilled. He was able to get anywhere he wanted. He was able to pick any lock, climb over any wall, squeeze through any window. He finally found his skill. He found his talent.
Cat burglar.
He found his talent. I don't know why he didn't become a locksmith. I guess maybe that wasn't an option. But he found his skill. He found his talent. And, some people in town kind of figured out what was going on. They kind of knew he was a town ganav, but they're not going to report him, right? So a Jew who's arrested for thievery in those days would face terrible punishments by the anti-Semitic government. So, they let it slide. And many years go by. Yanko raises his family, Baruch Hashem, he does well. And he gets older. And it's starting to get harder for him to climb over the walls and squeeze through windows. And one day he's trying to climb up through a window, and he falls down and he breaks his leg. And he's in big trouble, right? He can't continue his regular job, right? So he goes to the doctor, and the doctor's like, you got to change your line of work. This is not for you. You're too old. You got to retire. Now, the career of thievery doesn't have a good pension, doesn't have
job for your mouth.
doesn't have a good retirement plan, right? And there's no Social Security benefits for it. And Yankel's in trouble. What is he going to do? He's old. Baruch Hashem, he doesn't have a family to support, but he has to support himself. So he goes to the community, to the Gabbai Tzedakah, and they have a fund to support older people. And he says, I'm retiring and I need funds. I need a stipend. And the guy was like, absolutely not. You're a ganav, no way. We're not going to support you. You know how much money you stole from me and my colleagues? And Yankel has no choice. He sits down in shul and he starts begging people for money. And people walk by, you're asking us for money? Why don't you go and steal our money, right? You expect me to donate money to you, you thief? People are spitting at him. Nobody wants to give him anything. Right? In this town, there's this wealthy Jew. His name is Baruch. Baruch is not the biggest tzaddik. He's, I guess we would call a party boy. He spends his life having fun, having a good time. But he has a good heart. People know that Baruch's not the most righteous person, but if he sees somebody in trouble, he'll help him out. So Baruch sees poor Yankel sitting there, trying to collect money, and nobody wants to give him. And he says, listen, the Torah says you shouldn't steal, and there's a punishment for theft, but the punishment isn't death by starvation, right? You got to support everybody. So he calls over Yankel, and he says, I'll arrange a little stipend for you, I'll support you. That's what he does for the next few years until Yankel passes away. Baruch supports Yankel. Many years go by, Baruch himself gets old, and Baruch leaves this world, his soul leaves this world, and ascends to heaven. And he comes before the heavenly court. And they bring out the big book of records, and they start bringing out all of the good deeds, all the merits, and all of his sins, and they put it on the big scale. And, he helped a lot of people. He was a nice guy, but unfortunately, the other side is much heavier. Ari, come join us. So, the side of sins is much heavier, and the court, the judges look at it, and they say, listen, this side is heavier, we have to issue a verdict, and they convene to decide exactly what should happen with him. And they're about to announce the verdict, and suddenly somebody yells, hey, what happened to all the sins? One side of the scale is empty. A thief in heaven? Who could have done such a thing? And they see Yankel running away with listen, there's no more sins, they got to give Baruch a free pass, right? And Baruch goes straight through. And the Chayz would say over the story. And he would say, what does that mean? It's a thief stealing sins in heaven. What's the idea behind it? The idea behind it is that Baruch took a look at Yankel, and he said, he may have done terrible things, but he's in trouble, he needs help. I have to help him out. Right? I'm going to overlook all of the sins that he did. Yankov must have stolen from Baruch as well. It's not like Baruch was off the hook for this. Baruch said, listen, Yankov stole from me. He stole from a lot of people. But he's in trouble. He needs help. I'm going to help him out. So the same thing, we know that Hashem treats us the way we treat others. So when Baruch himself ended up in heaven, Hashem said, I'm willing to overlook everything he did. He needs help, and I'm going to let him through. And this is something that we all have to realize. When we see somebody who, may not may not be the most righteous person, but we see that he needs help, that he's in trouble, and if we're willing to overlook whatever he may have done, and we're willing to look behind what he's done and see what's causing him to do it, right? Maybe he's stealing because he needs to support his family, right? And we're willing to look at him that way. So that's also the way Hashem looks at us. Rab Shlomka of Zvil, Viller Rebbe, he used to, whenever he had a question, he used to go to the mikveh before he would answer the question. He would go to the mikveh very often. And I think it was a Friday or something, he was going to the mikveh, and he walks in the mikveh, it's empty, but there's this one person in the mikveh, and he's walking to the mikveh, and as he's walking, he knocks this guy's towel down, right? So it happens sometimes in the mikveh, everybody hangs their towels. When mikveh is full, if people are hanging their towels on top of other people's towels and whatever, but it's an empty mikveh, but he knocks this guy's towel down. He bends down, he picks it up, he apologizes. The guy looks at him, he starts yelling at him. You clumsy klutz, what are you walking by, knocking down my towel? Look where you're going, and he's yelling at him. And Rav Shlomka's Gaba's there, he wants to shut this guy up. Rav Shlomka's like, leave him be. That's the vent. And he's yelling, goes on for 5 minutes yelling at the Rebbe. And fine, the Rebbe. I finished it. He waits till he finishes. He apologizes. He goes to the mikveh and he leaves. He comes out and he says to his Gabbai, I have somewhere I need to go. He starts wandering around the town. He comes back a couple hours later with a little bag of money that he had collected. And he says to his Gabbai, I want you to go to this guy's house and give him this money. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, you give him the money. So the Gabbai goes to this guy's house. He knocks on the door. The guy opens the door, all angry. What, you're back again? You want more? And he says, no, I'm here. The Rebbe sent money for you. And his mouth drops open. He's like, how did the Rebbe know that I need money? Right? Thank you so much. Mamash, I'm telling you, I was a terrible day. I have my rent is coming up, and I can't afford to pay, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I was going crazy. How did the Rebbe know? Right? And of course, the Rebbe explained that when somebody blows up for no reason, he's not yelling at you. He's yelling at something else. There's something else that's bothering him. And you have to figure out what it is. Right? He may want to yell at his boss. He may want to yell at his wife. But he can't. Right? So who does he yell at? He yells at somebody who knocks his towel down in the mikveh. Right? And this is really what Moshe's mistake was. Moshe's argument to Hashem was that when you're dealing with tzaddikim, you're dealing with the Yidden when they came out of Mitzrayim, and Hashem told them to hit the rock. So certainly now, after they did all these terrible things and they're wandering in the desert for 40 years, for sure it's time to hit the rock again. Hashem says, no, the exact opposite is true. When you're dealing with somebody who's a tzaddik and he makes a mistake, you can tell him you did something wrong. You can rebuke him. When I was young, you can give him a patch. Today, you don't do that anymore. It has to be more of a verbal rebuke. Right? When you're dealing with a child, a good child, who messes up, his father's job, a parent's job, is to rebuke his child. Right? But what happens when you have a child who has a terrible day, making one problem after another? What are you going to do? You're going to scream at him? Continue yelling at him all the time? The answer is no. You have to sit down. You have to talk to him. You have to realize there's something bothering him. There's something troubling him. And you have to speak to him. You have to figure out what it is and see how you can help him. And just to conclude with one last story. What? We have to listen to other people. We have to listen. That's a big part of being. Yeah, you're right. That's what a psychologist is. Somebody who listens.
That's the key, believe it or not, on self.
Yes.
You just go there, let them tell you exactly what they need.
That's right. That's right. And yeah, you have to be willing to sit down and talk with them. So, Rav Shlomo of Babiv, the third Babiv Rebbe, who survived the Holocaust. He lost almost his entire family except one of his sons. He came to New York and he opened a shul in the Upper West Side. He opened the shul in the Upper West Side, and in those days it was hard to find a minyan over there. Right? Believe that? Way back, it was hard to find a minyan there. And you used to have to go outside, call people in. So one Shabbos, he's outside, and he sees this young man walking by, and he says, "Could you want to join us for a minyan?" And he starts yelling at him, "What? Do I look like a Jew?" And he says, "Yeah, you look like a Jew. Why are you bothering me? I'm trying to walk. I'm trying to do my own thing. What are you mixing into my affairs?" He obviously realized this is a Holocaust survivor who lost a lot of his family as well. And he says, we're short one person. We need a minyan. Come inside. Finally, after a few minutes of speaking, the guy agrees to come in. And the Rebbe starts talking to him. And he tells the Rebbe that before the war, he was actually a chazan. And the Rebbe says, "Oh, excellent. You could help lead the tefillos over here. Wonderful." So he honors him to lead up his musaf. And the next week again, he's walking outside, and again he sees this person. He calls him in. And the third week, again they don't have a minyan. So the Rebbe calls his son, Naftali Tzvi, and he tells him, "I want you to go to the park to call. This guy's probably in the park. Call him in for a minyan." So he goes to the park, and he sees this guy sitting on a bench in the park, reading the newspaper and smoking a cigarette. So he runs, but now today it's kind of normal to bring such people into shul. In those days it wasn't. So he runs back to his father, and he's like, "The guy was smoking Shabbos." And he says, "Yeah, did you call him in?" And he says, "No, he's Machal Shabbos for Hestia. He can't be part of a minyan." And he says, "Call him in."
Can you say it again? Nothing. This is a phenomenal story. Listen.
And he says he's smoking in public. He's Machal Shabbos in public. How could you go join him for a minyan? So the Rebbe looked at his son.
Not the Levavik.
No, the Babiv Rebbe, Shlomo of Babiv, the third Babiv Rebbe. And he said to him, "Reichert, der Deutsch Reichert." He's not smoking. The Nazi is smoking. The German, the Nazi is smoking. Go call him into the minyan. So he runs out, he calls him in, he doesn't really want to go, but he says he'll come later, he comes the next week. And after davening again, a few people go over to the Rebbe and they're like, Machal Shabbos, counting him as a minyan, you're not allowed to count him as a minyan. And again the Rebbe repeated, he said, Reichert, der Deutsch Reichert. He's not smoking, it's the Nazi who's smoking. And this guy kept on coming week after week for a few months. And after a few months, the Babiv Rebbe moved from Manhattan. They moved to Brooklyn, moved to Borough Park, and they didn't see this person for many, many years. About 50 years later, almost 50 years later, the Rebbe was already older. He was invited to a wedding. In those days, he didn't really go to weddings, but he agreed to come to the Shalom Zacher. And he called his son and 4 or 5 Hasidim who were very close to him for many years. And he said, "I'm going to Shalom Zacher. I want you to join me." They were a little surprised. What is he bringing them for? And they came to the Shalom Zacher, and the Rebbe introduces them to an old man who's there, the grandfather of the Chassan. And he says to them, "Do you recognize him?" They say, "No." And he calls him over, and he starts talking to him, and they realize that this is the person who they met 50 years earlier in the park, in the shul, that joined their minyan, was their chazan. And the Rebbe looks around at his, and he tells me, can you introduce us to your family? And he introduces them to his 10 children and his, 30, 40 grandchildren that he had. And he says, Rebbe, this is all because of you, he says. And the Rebbe turns to his son and to the few Hasidim who had complained 50 years earlier, and he says, didn't I tell you? Nicht Recher, der Deutsch Recher. Right? And that's something we have to realize, right? When we see another person who's, in our eyes doing something that's unimaginable, we have to think to ourselves, what are they going through? And maybe now is not the time to hit the rock. Maybe now is the time to sit down and speak with the rock. Chaim l'chaim.